Leora had always felt a soft, persistent pull inside her chest, an ache that didn't belong to the world around her. She lived her life quietly, moving through familiar streets, familiar voices, familiar routines that never quite seemed to fit the shape of her spirit. Everyone else appeared content with the rhythm of things, but she sensed something hidden beneath the surface, like a melody playing under a thick static haze. And one evening, when the sky dimmed into a subdued gold, that hidden melody finally rose to meet her. It began as a hum, gentle, subtle, nearly imperceptible. She first thought it was the wind brushing through the trees outside her window, but the sound didn't fade. If anything, it grew warmer, more deliberate. When she closed her eyes, the hum became a faint glow, forming itself behind her thoughts. The glow wasn't outside of her, nor behind her, nor above her. It came from within, emerging from the quiet space between breaths. And with it came an understanding she had spent her whole life reaching for without knowing the name of it. The world around her was a veil, and something deeper was calling her to remember who she had once been. Strange impressions filled her mind, stories she had never heard, landscapes she had never visited, symbols she somehow recognized. A great shining field stretched vast and endless, illuminated by a source that didn't burn yet cast perfect clarity across every facet of existence. She didn't have a word for it then, but she would soon learn it was called the monad, the pure origin from which all emanated. She saw rivers of living light flowing outward, branching like trees, singing with harmony. In those rivers, she saw beings, radiant, gentle, familiar. They looked at her the way one looks at someone returning home after ages of absence. And in a single, brief moment, she felt the fullness of belonging. But that vision collapsed as quickly as it arrived, torn away by something heavy and coarse. A shadow swept across the luminous field, fragmenting the light into pieces that scattered like shards of broken mirrors. In its place rose a dense world of matter, hard, cold, and confining. The harmony faded into a thick hum of static. Leora felt her chest tighten as the vision dissolved, leaving behind only a tremor of memory and a longing that cut through her with sharp clarity. She understood, even without language, that she had once known that radiant realm. She had been a part of it. And she had fallen far from it. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the contrast between the luminous field and the dim heaviness of her present world. A quiet truth surfaced in her thoughts: this place is not your home. You were separated, sent here, hidden among those who forgot their origin. The realization wasn't frightening, it was relieving, like finally hearing the answer to a question that had followed her since childhood. In the days that followed, small cracks began appearing in the world she had assumed was stable. Conversations around her felt scripted, predictable, strangely hollow. People repeated phrases without emotion, as though they were merely reenacting roles given to them long ago by someone they no longer remembered. And the more she noticed it, the more the veil thinned. A subtle pressure settled over her thoughts, as if something in the unseen attempted to keep her from looking too deeply. The hum she had felt earlier returned again, this time sharper, as though urging her to stay awake. When she turned inward, she sensed not only the glow of memory but also a resistance, an intrusive heaviness that didn't belong to her. At first it felt like doubt whispering discouragement. Then it took on the shape of quiet fear. The voice didn't speak with words, but its message was unmistakable: stop searching. Stay asleep. Forget what you saw. It pressed against her mind the way a cold hand presses against warm skin. But Leora didn't retreat. She kept walking toward the inner glow, and with each step, the resistance weakened. One evening, while sitting alone in her dimly lit room, she whispered the question that had been forming for days. Who is trying to keep me from remembering? The moment the words left her lips, the air shifted. Not physically, but perceptually. The hum inside her brightened, and a new image emerged in her thoughts, a vast structure of gears, layered upon layers, tangled in loops that never ended. Mechanical eyes watched from its edges, cold and unblinking, observing every movement, every breath. She felt a shiver run through her as she recognized, without explanation, what the structure represented: the false creator, the architect of confinement, the demiurge. A being who had constructed a world of limitation, using matter and illusion to bind the sparks of light that had once belonged to the monad. And she saw, with sudden clarity, that she was one of those sparks. A fragment of the original light, exiled and hidden, but never extinguished. Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in awakening. Everything she had glimpsed was not imagination. It was memory. And the memory was beginning to reconnect itself piece by piece, like a constellation revealing its shape in the night sky. She understood then that she was not alone. Others like her existed, scattered, sleeping, waiting for the same quiet call. The exile of the sparks had been a long story, but the return was beginning. And the more she opened herself to the glow within, the more the static around her loosened, revealing the faint outline of a path she didn't yet fully understand. But she knew this much: the hidden keys were rising again, and she had already stepped onto the first one simply by remembering. The days that followed unfolded differently for Leora. The world did not change in any dramatic physical way, yet she felt every moment as though she were walking through a veil that had grown thinner, more fragile, almost translucent. The quiet hum inside her no longer flickered sporadically; instead, it pulsed with a gentle consistency, like a lantern guiding her through a dim corridor. Each pulse brought with it small impressions, symbols, echoes, fragments of memory she did not consciously seek but somehow recognized as essential pieces of a long-forgotten truth. One morning, while sitting alone in the small courtyard behind her home, she felt a subtle warmth begin to gather at the center of her chest. It was not the warmth of emotion, nor the warmth of sunlight. It felt older, ancient, intelligent, familiar. When she placed her hand over it, she sensed a movement beneath her palm, not physical but energetic, as though a tiny flame deep within her spirit had stirred and awakened. And from that flame rose a soft whisper that carried no sound yet spoke directly into her being: "Remember the spark." She closed her eyes, letting the whisper settle into her awareness. The world around her dimmed, and her thoughts drifted inward. Suddenly, she found herself standing in a quiet expanse of darkness, not frightening, only still. And from the floor of that darkness emerged a single line of light, drawing itself upward, expanding into a shape she did not recognize at first. Then she understood: it was a key. Not made of metal or matter, but formed from consciousness. It shimmered gently, as though eager for her to approach. "This is the first key," she whispered, though she wasn't sure where the words came from. The key glowed brighter in response. A moment later, her surroundings dissolved, and she found herself back in the courtyard. The warmth in her chest intensified, and with it came a sensation of clarity, as though someone had wiped dust from a mirror. She could feel the difference immediately. The heaviness that had lingered in the background of her thoughts, quiet doubts, subtle anxieties, lingering fears, began to separate themselves from her awareness. These emotions were not gone, but she could now see them for what they were: intrusions, not truths. "This is the first movement of remembering," the inner whisper said. "To know your spark is not the voice of fear." Leora breathed slowly, allowing the realization to integrate. She watched her thoughts with a soft detachment, noticing for the first time how many of them did not arise naturally. Some felt planted, like seeds dropped into the soil of her mind by something that wished to keep her dim. A subtle pressure surrounded them, almost mechanical in nature, as though attempting to push her back toward forgetfulness. "This is what the Archons do," she murmured. The words felt heavy but accurate. She understood now that archonic influence was not loud or dramatic; it was subtle, woven into the texture of ordinary thought, nudging her toward self-doubt, distraction, and emotional turbulence. They did not need to imprison her physically; they imprisoned through constant noise. She felt the second key appear before she even saw it. This time, it came not from darkness but from a sudden, vivid burst of memory. A memory she did not recall living. She was standing in the luminous field once more, the realm of pure origin, watching as countless sparks of divine light danced in harmony. They were not separate beings but reflections of the same consciousness, expressions of the monad experiencing itself in radiant multiplicity. And in that memory, she saw her own spark as a small but vibrant flame, rising with the others, knowing its place, knowing its purpose. But then the memory trembled. A sharp rift tore across the horizon, and she watched as countless sparks were pulled downward toward the shadowed layers of matter. She felt the fear of that fall, the confusion, the disorientation. And then the memory ended abruptly. When she opened her eyes, she recognized the second key resting in the center of that memory, the understanding that her essence was not separate from the origin she had glimpsed. She had simply forgotten. The third key arrived that evening. Leora was seated beside her small window, watching the world outside move with its usual mechanical rhythm. People walking, talking, performing their daily motions with a sense of unconscious repetition. She realized how deeply the Demiurge's system conditioned everything: habits, beliefs, language, even the way people understood themselves. The world wasn't designed to awaken sparks, it was designed to keep them asleep. As she observed the movements around her, she noticed the static again, a subtle interference pressing against her thoughts. But this time, instead of pushing through it blindly, she recognized it. She saw the pattern. It always appeared when she moved closer to remembering. It always grew stronger when she approached clarity. And recognizing it dissolved its power. "That is the third key," she said softly. "To see the interference while it's happening." The moment she spoke, the static receded like a tide pulling away from the shore. Her chest brightened with a soft glow, gentler than the sun, but infinitely more real. For the first time, she trusted what she felt. She trusted that the hum, the warmth, the visions, the keys, none of it was imagination. It was all part of a larger map guiding her back to what she had always been. And as she sat there, allowing the glow to fill her, she understood that the 5 keys of remembering were not random revelations. They were sequential, deliberate, ancient. And she had only just begun unlocking them. Night had settled quietly over the city, drawing a soft curtain of stillness across the world below. Leora stood at the threshold of her small balcony, hands gently resting on the railing, her gaze fixed on the sky. Something about the darkness tonight felt different, less oppressive, more spacious, almost as if the sky were subtly expanding to make room for a truth she hadn't yet fully touched. The hum in her chest, once faint and easily drowned by ordinary life, now pulsed with clear intention. It was not guiding her anymore. It was calling her. The 4th key revealed itself before she realized she had already stepped into its presence. Her breath slowed as the world around her softened, its edges blurring until everything faded into a shade of warm shadow. And in that shadow, she saw the patterns of her old life unfold like scenes in a play, moments of frustration that had seemed unexplainable, periods of heavy sadness, sudden waves of confusion, and those stretches of time where she felt she was drifting through her days without any sense of direction. She had once assumed these moments were simply part of being human, consequences of circumstance. But now, watching them replay before her, she saw the threads that connected them. They were not random. They were engineered. Each emotional dip, each draining thought, each disruption of clarity had been a carefully woven strand in a web of interference. Not to harm her directly, but to dim her, to make her forget, to keep her from looking inward long enough to see who she truly was. Now that she recognized the design, the web collapsed instantly. Every pattern broke apart like brittle stone. And from the rubble rose a simple, profound understanding: nothing that had ever dimmed her had belonged to her. A gentle warmth gathered at the base of her spine, rising slowly along her back like a tide of light. She inhaled deeply. The air felt different, charged with a quiet strength she had not felt in lifetimes. The 4th key had completed itself, not through effort, but through the act of recognition. She felt taller. Lighter. And when she opened her eyes again, the night sky above her shimmered subtly, as though acknowledging her shift. The fifth key did not approach quietly. It surged.
It came in a sudden wave of clarity, so swift and bright that she nearly staggered. In an instant, she saw the entire system for what it was, not just the mechanical structure of control, not just the archonic interference, not just the psychological loops that kept people asleep, but the entire architecture of confinement from beginning to end. It was vast, intricate, ancient. Yet beneath its complexity rested a simple foundation: the Demiurge's system survived only as long as the sparks remained unaware of themselves. That was the final key. The moment a spark remembered what it was, truly remembered, the system lost its hold. Leora felt the recognition settle into her bones. She was no longer an exile wandering in confusion. She was a returning being of light reclaiming her awareness. The archonic static dissolved completely from her mind. Her thoughts moved with gentle clarity, effortless, like water flowing along the path it naturally knew. And with that clarity came the quiet understanding that the world would not remain silent in response. She sensed the shock waves moving through the unseen, small tremors signaling resistance, echoes of an ancient mechanism reacting to her awakening. It was not anger. It was simply the system behaving as it had been designed to behave, tightening its loops whenever a spark slipped free. But unlike before, she was not afraid. She stepped back into her room, the glow in her chest now steady as a heartbeat. She moved with a slowness that felt intentional, as though every action carried weight. She sat at the edge of her bed, lowered her head, and allowed the fifth key to anchor fully into her being. "I exit the system," she whispered softly, words not meant as rebellion but as remembrance. "I return to what I have always been."
The room brightened, not physically, but in presence. A veil lifted. A path revealed itself, not externally, but within her awareness, forming from the same gentle light that had called her from the beginning. She knew she would follow it. She knew it would lead her beyond the confines of this world, beyond the designs of the Demiurge, back toward the luminous field she had once known. And in that quiet room, with nothing but her steady breath and the hum of her awakened spark, Leora stepped fully into her return. My friend, if you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, take a moment to breathe with it. Not every tale is meant to entertain, some are meant to remind, to stir something inside you that has been waiting patiently for the smallest spark of recognition. Leora's journey is fictional, yet the quiet questions it raises are very real for many people. Why do we feel out of place sometimes? Why does the world feel heavier than it should? Why does a subtle call towards something higher echo inside us, even when we can't explain it? This story is not here to tell you what to believe. It's here to gently touch the part of you that's already seeking, already listening. And if any part of Leora's awakening mirrored something in your own heart, let that softness stay with you for a while. Let it guide you back to your breath, back to your intuition, back to the small, steady glow you carry quietly within. We live in a world full of noise, constant movement, constant pressure, constant distraction. But beneath all of that, there is always a still place where your own inner light keeps its steady rhythm. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to chase anything. You only need to remember that the journey inward is always open to you.
Before we wrap up, I want to thank you deeply for being here. Stories like this only come alive when someone listens with an open heart, and that someone is you. If you'd like more stories, more explorations, or more soft reminders like this, I invite you to stay connected. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing so you won't miss what's coming next. If something in the story resonated, feel free to leave a like, it truly supports the channel. And if you know someone who might feel this message, please share it with them. You never know whose spark might light up next. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next journey.